is updated and changed. Right now, these current gift ban prohibitions under 5.1 and 12 are replaced with this new gift ban section. So I wanted to point out that the current, gift ban applies primarily to principals and lobbyists, but it does include, anyone who has a closely associated business that's, being regulated by a government body. And it prohibits these folks from exchanging a thing of value with any public official or public employee in state or local government. So it's pretty broad in its application. And the way that the prohibited sources are drafted now is to kind of create and establish more of a nexus between who's receiving something and who's giving something before they would necessarily be considered a prohibited source. And that brings me to the next point is that it goes beyond now. This draft would expand the current scope of the gift ban beyond just principals and lobbyists and add prohibited sources. Um, and again, would create that nexus. So let's dive into this a little bit more. So just as a quick recap, y'all are familiar, I'm sure, with the current gift ban, right? Thing of value is prohibited, which is a very broad definition. Any gift, benefit, favor, anything of monetary value, but it has 18 exclusions. And then those exclusions have exclusions and additions and things like that we've gone over in previous meetings. So, and the exceptions, the notable exceptions in the current laws, these are things y'all are familiar with: campaign donations, gifts from families or friends, full value that the recipient pays, employment compensation exceptions, educational functions, widely attended events, those kinds of things are the common ones existing. So here's where we get into what we propose to change. And this is slide 20 for you guys. So now we have a gift ban that's basically revised to apply to anything that's valued over $100 with certain exceptions. As you can see right there, the very top bullet point is what I have as kind of the summary of the new gift ban, right? Public servants may not solicit or accept gifts from prohibited sources, and prohibited sources may not offer or provide gifts to public servants or spouses or dependents or associated businesses. I've already mentioned this. Anything valued over $100 will be considered a gift. So again, it's a broad statement. There are exclusions, and they're very similar to existing exclusions, but there's just more simplified categories for them to fall into. So there's fewer of them. So as you can see, these exclusions, right, are familiar: campaign and inaugural contributions, including advice and other kind of campaign support, financial transactions in the ordinary course of business with similarly situated individuals, anytime a government body, anything paid for by a government body that supports that government body other than sporting tickets, that's familiar to y'all. Anything provided by associations to which the state or local government body pays dues, like NCSL, CSG South, the state bar. Employment compensation earned from outside employment, unless circumstances make it clear it is purposed to influence official activities. So I included this phrase in a parenthetical, and this is number 5 on here because this is just a kind of a notable change. Current law has it in reverse. It's employment compensation is allowed if circumstances prove that it has nothing to do with the office. This is it's allowed unless the circumstances prove it's being conducted for influential purposes as opposed to just regular purposes. Also, it's added anything provided through inheritance. Okay, so that's kind of the exclusions to what is considered a gift. Now, this next slide, slide 21, is dealing with the exceptions to the gift ban. Why is this? Why is this a distinction, right? Because if it doesn't fall into the definition, it's not a gift, doesn't have to be reported. But now under this draft, if it's an exception to the gift ban, then it has to be reported. So that's why there are 2 different categories. And these exceptions are travel costs and expenses. This is number 1 here under the second bullet point. Basically for educational functions where the giver is a sponsor. Gifts exchanged between family and friends, again, unless the circumstances make it clear the motivation is not for the family or friend relationship, and is instead to substantially influence official action. Number 3 is your familiar, food, beverage, and hospitality exceptions for widely attended events. The word widely attended events, I don't think actually appears in the draft. That's just kind of what they are. But there's a few different kind of categories here. In this draft, there's seated meals with expectation of 12 or more persons with diversity of views. There's a reception or similar event other than a seated meal where there's a reasonable expectation of 25 or more attendees. Events where all the members of the legislature or a caucus or committee are invited. And of course, events where all members of a local legislative body are invited. So those are the exceptions. Representative Travis. No, that's actually a good question, and I didn't hit on it in depth yet. We'll get into that when we get to prohibited source reporting. So it would be the provider of that thing that a public official received, a teacher, firefighter, legislator, local commissioner. Those are the ones that receive. That's not a reporting requirement for the recipient. It's a reporting requirement for the source that provided it, which is a prohibited source.
And just so you know, to kind of help clarify this point, if it's less than $100, it's not a gift, so it doesn't apply. If it's more than $100, it has to fall under one of these exceptions, and it has to be reported. And it's reported by the principal, the lobbyist, the prohibited source.
Yes, sir, Representative England. The whoever is falling under the definition of a prohibited source, which right now I'd have to flip to the page and get there, but I think we're going to get there in a few slides. But I think your question is important, right? Which is, okay, who has to do the reporting? Prohibited sources have to do with the reporting, so it would depend on whether who gave the item would be considered a prohibited source, and we're about to get into that coming up now, which is kind of what we're trying to get into with this whole with this draft, is tying a nexus to who prohibited sources are, a nexus between the prohibited source and the recipient. So we'll get into that. All right, I believe that we are now on this slide right here. So let's get into that. So this is the draft prohibited source definition, right? It includes a lobbyist and the principal of a lobbyist who are engaged in lobbying the public servant's government body. So right now, the gift ban applies basically statewide. So if I'm a principal or a lobbyist giving something in, I hire somebody to do some work in the north end of the state only, a local county or city, I am now considered a principal or lobbyist, for the purposes of the existing law for the entire state, even though I may only hire a lobbyist or be a lobbyist in one particular area of the state that only deals with matters relating to, a city or a county in the corner of the state, but it applies statewide. So this would kind of change that, right? And so now it would include lobbyists and principals who are engaged in lobbying the public service government body. So somebody who is lobbying a city in Northeast Alabama would not necessarily be a prohibited source for a family member, a friend, or just a colleague in the southeast corner of Alabama. It depends on whether they have activities they are doing and conducting within the public servant's government body. So the public servant then is the person that kind of is their government body is what determines whether somebody's a prohibited source or not, or some entity is. So it also includes a person, this is the second bullet point, doing business or seeking to do business. So now we're going beyond just principals and lobbyists. It includes a person doing business or seeking to do business with a public servant's government body. It includes anyone conducting or seeking to conduct activities that are not in the ordinary course of business that's regulated by the public servant's government body. And includes anyone seeking basically official action or to influence the official action by that public servant's body. Yes, sir.
All right. When you said earlier it's statewide and the exception is not statewide, I'm thoroughly confused by that.
Okay. I'll see if I can help you. So the idea is all of the prohibited sources, all of the lobbyists would have to register what government body they are lobbying. But let's say someone is lobbying Tuscaloosa County. It has no business in Baldwin County. They don't do anything in Baldwin County. They're not trying to influence me in Baldwin County or do anything with it. It creates a nexus of they're prohibited from the gift ban of giving stuff to someone from Tuscaloosa County where they're doing business, but they wouldn't fall on the list of somebody that they're not doing business with. And this is kind of consider the different, and then we're talking about the nexuses of the city lobbyists that are trying to lobbyist a city or a county commission to go there. You may have a relationship with somebody through there.
But it's really not we're really talking about the relationship and the intent.
Right.
So does it matter? I mean, because what I'm saying is we're talking about it's a statewide ban, but it effectively it is, because we're really not talking about, it's the nature of the relationship and the transaction itself. So it really doesn't matter where it is or who you're involved with. If it's not a gift, it's not a gift. If your intent isn't to corruptly influence, then does it matter? Because the reason I'm asking this question is we're all going to be required to follow this in the event it becomes the law.
Mhm.
And I don't want to create a distinction about a difference that will confuse people in terms of, well, this isn't going to be considered a gift because, I don't lobby you as part of my, you know, data, as part of my contract or my job. You know what I'm saying?
No, I get it, and that's what right now. It's a statewide ban. This would change it from a statewide ban to the local, to having the nexus of I don't lobby you through it. That's the change that this draft does compared to the current statute. We need to look into that. If we need to make some language clearer on that, or that's not a that's not a hard line in the sand I'm willing to draw. I'm
Yeah,
willing to
I
work with
just,
you guys on something through there. But the intent was to make sure, like, if somebody is a road builder in, again, Tuscaloosa County, I'm just going to use you and me as an example. If somebody's a road builder in Tuscaloosa County, that person is not trying to influence me with, like, if we go do something, because I don't have any business in Tuscaloosa County. If they're lobbying the state, yes, that's a whole issue because they're lobbying the legislature through that. I would be barred from that because they're lobbying the state.
so does that mean that that person who isn't lobbying me at that moment can give me anything?
Mm-mm.
Why not?
Who isn't lobbying you at that moment, they would be a prohibited source. So they fall under the gift ban. If it's less than $99, if it's less than $100, if it's not a thing of value, then it falls under the gift ban. But
So
if
why do we need the distinction then? Because to me, in my mind, it's kind of circular because it's still going to be statewide because we're only just talking about the intent and the transaction itself. So, and just because at the very moment I'm not I'm not lobbying you for whatever purpose, but there's a chance in the future that I could just be.
if there's a chance in the future you might, then you wouldn't fall under this exception. If the nexus is the connecting point.
Yeah. So, okay, I'm thoroughly confused. So
Okay.
I'm gonna talk to you about that. I'll talk to you more about that because this just doesn't right now. It's not registering for some reason.
There is one part in the current draft. It's probably not going to answer the question fully. There's one part in the current draft that might get at what you were mentioning there at the very end, and that is, it says anyone that is seeking or intends to seek or does business or intends to do business. So I think there's a little bit of a language that I think tries to get at the point one of the points you were making there. Kind of about the nexus, and maybe statewide is not the best way to phrase that. I will say the example that I used personally was, okay, there's going with the Tuscaloosa Baldwin County thing is, okay, there's right now, if a local business owner hires a lobbyist to work on a city matter in Tuscaloosa, they're considered a principal and can't, let's say they have a friend that's a teacher in a Baldwin County school, but they decide they want to give all the teachers there $125 gift certificates. Well, they can't because they're a principal under current law. Sorry, or I guess $50 gift certificates now, because whatever the current thing of value limitation is, $32, I think, given inflation adjustment. Whatever that is now, whatever the numbers are, currently they are limited by the gift ban because of the statewide application of the definition of principal. And under this draft, it would say, okay, in that scenario, a person that is just involved, a business owner in the city of Tuscaloosa that just hires a lobbyist to work on a city of Tuscaloosa matter only would not necessarily be a prohibited source compared to a teacher, or some type of other, employee or somebody in Baldwin County. I'm not saying that I'm not expecting the answer to the question. We're happy to dive into that deeper as we go on. Of course, Representative Simpson will chime in, and we're happy to talk about that further. And I know Representative Jackson had a question too.
Yeah, I was trying to clarify the law right now is statewide. That's what you're saying. And the draft.
You are a principal or a lobbyist,
Right.
Current definition, then you're a principal lobbyist no matter where you go to any public official and any public servant or public employee.
And the draft would change that to a source of purpose of what you're working and lobbying at that particular time.
That's right. What I am intending to do as a principal lobbyist or other prohibited source has nothing to do with, if what I'm doing as a principal or lobbyist has nothing to do with your position, I have no connection, no nexus to you as a public servant somewhere else in the state, then this draft would not consider that person to be a prohibited source, so the gift ban would not apply.
one other thing that may kind of help clear this up. We're used to lobbyists for the legislature, and that's just what we're used to. Sometimes if somebody's a principal, let's say they buy books and they sell books to the local school board, well, they're not coming to us. They don't have anything to do with us.
Right.
But they would definitely be under the definition in this current law, they would be considered a principal for the statewide ban. So they would be affecting our information. They would be the prohibited source for us, even though they don't deal with us.
I got it.
Mr. Shaw, did you have a question?
I had one quick thing. So I think one thing that might help is a time frame on that. I mean, I see obviously shrinking down the scope of who's subject to this helps because you're less likely to have a third cousin. I mean, my wife is related to everybody in the state, you know, the third cousin on one end and the fourth cousin on this. But since that helps a lot because you're less likely to have these inadvertent things. The other thing is I think we know what we did in the past. We know we encountered a lobbyist or something in the past. But if they intend to do something in the future, you might want to put a time frame on that so that if there's some round of golf or dinner or something like that, well, hey, you know, we have an existing relationship. I can't lobby this jurisdiction for 12 months or 6 months or whatever. That might help clarify that what that is, because 2 years later somebody could be before a local body just because that's what people tend to work around a lot of different areas. Thank you.
Yes, I'm sorry. All right, I think my issue is the statewide terminology, because the law, I mean, the law is statewide regardless. So we're not focused on, it's going to apply to wherever you are.
That is correct.
So it's not necessarily, we're not talking about basically a locale sort of exception. We're talking about the nature of the transaction and the relationship that makes it either your prohibited source or not. So it still applies statewide, but what we're talking about here is for this specific transaction, if you don't have any business before or with this particular person, then you're not a prohibited source for the purposes of this.
That's correct.
All right. So the statewide business, that's what was throwing me off. I think the better way to kind of phrase it is just based on the intent, the nature of the transaction itself determines whether or not you're a prohibited source for this particular instance. All right.
I agree with that.
All right.
Okay, so the definition of a principal is the next section here on page 22 of your handout and on the PowerPoint. There's lots of discussion that's gone into this. We've gone over this, you know, in this committee during our informational meetings this last year. So basically, it keeps the existing definition, but it adds an individual who directs the activities of a lobbyist. There's a lot of discussion that came out of the commission report, the Ethics Commission and Revision Report from 2019 that talked about this. A lot of other talk. This is how this draft addresses that issue as far as the definition of a principal is concerned. So next is the penalties now. So yet again, we're under a different framework here. So the penalties have been significantly revised. For a first offense, it's a civil penalty of no more than 2 times the value of the gift, or for a public servant, maybe a public reprimand if there's a determination that the public servant did not know the gift was from a prohibited source or over $100. For a second offense, it's 3 times the value of the gift in violation. Third offense, 5 times. And then fourth or subsequent, there's a presumption there of a criminal violation and notification to the Attorney General or the local district attorney. And they can also notify the public servant's governmental body for any potential additional discipline. Okay, the next section. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Representative Travis. That is a good question. It's probably better suited for Representative Simpson to mention that.
So the registration would be the requirement of the principal of the lobbyist to do that. It's on them to make sure that they fall within the lines. The lobbyists are held accountable in this line too, that they don't come give you a gift of over $100 to come through there. Now, they can look at the entire framework of the totality of the circumstances. If somebody's just walking up and giving you, $100 or over $100, they're going to look into everything that they have here through this process. Remember, these bans are the exclusion of the gift bans. So in the state house, they have to wear the badge that comes through that says, hey, they're lobbyists. They have to go through that. So we're trying to make sure that anybody, the onus falls on the principal to lobby to say, I'm registered to do this, and I'm registered because I lobby these specific bodies.
Mr. Travis, can you turn on your microphone, please? That's right.
Thought it was okay. The issue, what I was trying to determine, for instance, if you're dealing with someone, it's just to say conversation or talking and dealing with them and everything, they have no reasons to say, well, I'm a principal.
Oh, if they're talking, the talking is no issue with this.
What I was saying, but then if they said, okay, well, why don't you just hop on the plane, let's go look at this with me and everything, but I don't know that they are a situation that they got a principal, that they high lobbyists. You see what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
So how, and that's what I'm trying to figure out, how I would identify, do we have to say, okay, let me go look, everybody that you deal with, let me go see, are you registered as a principal and everything, rather than, because I can say, for instance, I know people that, we're friends with, but I don't know that they actually have business. As you said, it may be a local, something, or whether state, but there's no way that I know that they entertain or hire.
And that's what we've tried to cover through this aspect and that's why it's under the ethics code in the civil violation now, instead of being a criminal code in the situation. So meaning if you don't know someone's a principal and someone's a principal, and the facts, they should indicate to you that, hey, and that this is up to the ethics code to make the determination. Paul, tell me if I'm wrong on this. It's up to them to make the determination on the facts of, hey, that your first offense. They can say you need to be this, you need to be educated, you need to be trained in a public reprimand, up to potentially making you refund the value of the ticket. But if you do this 3 or 4 times, then they can get up to 5 times the value of the plane. Or if it becomes to the 4th or subsequent offense, they can refer it to the AG or the DA to say, hey, you need to look into criminal prosecution because this person's doing something they shouldn't be doing.
But I was just trying from the first time, trying to figure out, how would I know that they.
And we've got first time is they can do a public reprimand, they can do a private reprimand, they can do just kind of there's opportunities to make sure that, hey, we're not going to send you to prison for 20 years for the first time for you messed up on something that you didn't understand. You may have to pay the fine, but you may have to pay the airfare back. But that's kind of what we're looking through there.
All right.
Mr. England.
I think we need to kind of flesh that out a little bit, because first and foremost, if both parties are unaware in a transaction that who's a principal and who's not, I don't see how you would publicly reprimand or find someone in a situation where you got 2 people who honestly did not know that they were a principal lobbyist or engaged in a transaction that would violate this, because just as we said a second ago, it's the definition, or the person who's considered a principal, I guess, in this situation, isn't it? It's a situational. It also depends on who you're talking to and what you're talking about, right?
So if you want to have a known or should have known language put in there, I have no problem putting known or should have known. That may solve the problem that you're looking for.
Yeah.
To say this person knows or should have known that person is a principal. I've got no issue adding that language to the bill.
Okay, is if we're saying that, obviously the law applies statewide, but it's based upon the nature of the relationship that you have with the person that you're talking to the point that it also implicates the type of conversation you're having. You would see how somebody who's a principal talking to one person, but in the same conversation may not be a principal talking to somebody else, who may even be under the same jurisdiction or the same municipality. You can see how that may get confusing, especially considering that, previously everybody just had to register, right? Now this registration is specific to the relationship that you're creating with the governmental body and so forth. And I'm still trying to, as I was reading this the other night, I'm still trying to figure out how this sort of plays out with the economic developer exception too, because that still completely confuses me. What the difference between somebody who's lobbying and somebody who's an economic developer, especially for the purposes of these conversations. So it just seems like it's kind of situational, it's nebulous, and I think we probably need to known or should have known language will certainly help with that.
Okay.
But also considering that you may be a quote unquote principal talking to 3 or 4 different people, and your relationship with each of those individuals may be different. We may have to kind of dig into that a little bit.
Absolutely. We can absolutely flesh that out.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to say, wouldn't that depend on the subject matter, the conversation?
If they're trying to influence your activities in the body, then they would be a prohibited source. So yeah, it's kind of, and that's the way we have the language in the draft now. If they're trying to influence your activities, like if somebody's coming up to you and be like, hey, let's go on an airplane ride, and I want to show you about this thing that we're trying to ask you for $3 million for from the state legislature. Well, that's kind of a sign that you probably need to be aware of what's going on.
That's a red flag, right there, you know.
You know, that's what we're trying to cover, to make sure that nobody's just hopping on flights to come through this. So if somebody just gets on there and like, hey, you know, we went to a golf tournament with 4 people, like Representative England's talking about, and you don't know that it's a principal, it's a different relationship with everybody. I think the known or should have known. I am all for fleshing it out to make it clear. That's the intent of what we're trying to do, is make it clear.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna see how far I can get with the time we have remaining. Just cut me off.
Yes, sir.
Chair, the right time. Okay. So now we're moving into a new section. This is still under kind of the general category of prohibited acts under this draft. So this new section 42 is a new section that would be added, that would just kind of add some clarifying language regarding employment of public officials, public servants, public official prior to holding office, right? So that it basically just says nothing in the ethics code would prohibit a public official once taking office to continue his or her profession or skill he was engaged with or she was engaged with beforehand. And also clarifies that just because an increase in compensation happens doesn't mean that's a presumption that that increase was somehow related to official positions.
I do want to say this current laws will still apply for the double dipping statute would still fall under the you can't do that if it falls under double dipping. This is just outside of the double dipping statute.
Okay, section 43, elected officials prohibited from lobbying. So this basically just carries forward the basic prohibition that was contained in section 23A and is currently contained in section 23A of our ethics code, but it does have several changes. So currently, no state or local elected official can act as a lobbyist before any state or local government body during their elected term of office without any exception. So this, and I'm sorry again for the small writing, you have to look at, we're on, I think, page 25 of your handout. The proposed changes are, so for local officials, only prohibited from lobbying government bodies within their jurisdiction, right? Their sphere of influence of that county or city where they serve. And it would only be applicable while they are holding office. And for statewide elected officials, the changes here are that, of course, they'd continue to be prohibited from lobbying any state or local government body, except that they can engage in their private employment professions. They can, and this is that otherwise represent clients language that we talked about a few months ago that caused a lot of people problems with what that meant. This is to kind of clarify, hey, that you can represent clients, okay, as long as, you know, in your professional capacity, as long as the public servant is not a member of the particular government body that they're representing their client in front of, and as long as it's not related to his or her official duties. The prohibition under this draft would also only be applicable while they are holding office. As far as penalties are concerned, it's civil penalties, again, that's commensurate with the economic gain that's obtained in violation, but a subsequent offense would be a presumption of criminal activity. Okay. Yes, sir.
So if I'm reading this update correctly, Jimmy, it's the lobbying prohibition is only applicable while you're holding office, so we're removing that 24-month prohibition afterwards. Where we're at right now.
That's coming up next. That's revolving door. Yes,
thank you.
good question. This is for while you're in office, or lobbying. Yes, while you're in office. Or for the existing code says for the term of your office. So there is a change there in the terms, but I think what you're technically getting at is the revolving door section next. So in this current law, term of office, this while you're in office. Next, Revolving door, okay, again, carries forward the basic prohibitions in Section 13 of the current Ethics Code. And again, as just a quick recap, the revolving door, okay, it requires a 2-year waiting period for certain categories of public officials. And for elected officials, that waiting period is 2 years currently. Current law is the moratorium is for 2 years plus the remainder of their elected term if they leave office before the expiration of that term. And again, penalties commensurate with economic gain. Subsequent offenses could be a presumption of criminal activity. This next slide is just a kind of you can just have it for your notes. It's just a reminder of what the revolving door covers. 3 main categories: public officials and public employees can't act as lobbyists before their former government bodies. Public officials and employees who make purchases or negotiate contracts with third parties are barred from entering into or negotiating contracts or awards with their former agency. And then as far as public sector auditors, investigators, and regulators of private sector entities, you can't go work for those private sector entities that you investigated while you were in public service. Those are the 3 main categories. Now we get into kind of the proposed changes. I'm going to have to skip over this for time. You've got it in your handout, but it basically is now allowing, kind of establishing in code what has kind of been the more recent practice, especially given the 2019 Ethics Clarification Commission meeting, which is to allow for public-to-public transfers. Okay, I'm a public servant of some sort, and I go work for another public entity. That's fine. There's no 2-year waiting period. And then as far as elected officials are concerned, it would, before lobbying your former body, currently it was just 2 years plus the remainder of the term. This would change it to 2 years after leaving service or the remainder of your elected term, whichever is longer. And the rest of that, I'm going to leave for you to get back to your notes, and I'm happy to answer any follow-up questions, at a later time. Okay, so Section 45, floor privileges continues on. Contingency fee lobbying, no changes, I don't think there. Now we're into kind of a registration and reporting section. I'm on page 30, section 60. Most of this is just a continuation of section 18 with a few changes. It raises the annual registration fee from 100 to 200. Instead of listing subject matters, it requires a listing instead of all the government bodies that the lobbyist engages. Or if not that, then a statement that the lobbyist does not want to be limited in interacting with any government body. It also requires just a simple little termination notice requirement if somebody stops being a lobbyist. Section 61, new section here, prohibited source reporting. A lot of this is out of current section 19, but obviously there's a good amount of changes here because we've changed up the gift ban framework. So instead of reporting expenditures to public servants, these are prohibited sources that are exceptions to a thing of value in excess of 250, which is the current law. Now the prohibited sources would report the payment of any and all expenditures to public servants that are exceptions to this gift ban, which is namely the travel expenses for educational functions and then hospitality and meals at large gatherings. There's also a quarterly report requirement that is not required every quarter. If somebody has a prohibited source only during 2 quarters out of a year, they don't have to file every quarter if they stop being a prohibited source for the remainder of that year, but lobbyists and principals have to continue to do that. Penalties for failure to file these reports, as you can see, increase over time and by category. Statements of economic interests is where we are next, okay? A lot of this is continuation from current code section 14 of the Ethics Code. It does reduce the categories, 25 currently down to 14, and kind of tries to simplify and streamline some of those categories. And it would require less people to, our understanding is that less people would be required to file. Like one of the examples is there was a couple of catch-all phrases like all public servants making over a certain amount have to file statements of economic interest. Another one is all full-time non-merit ones. Those 2 are gone, and instead it's focusing on what these individuals are doing that was required them to file, not necessarily how much they make or just whether they're merit or non-merit. The next slide is actually a summary. As you can see, there's lots of words on that, but it's more useful as a right in your handout to kind of look over who must file. Elected officials and candidates, all appointed officials with statewide jurisdiction, employees of the legislature, and then the listing of what must be disclosed is there too. Go ahead.
I do want to draw attention to this because this is important. This is one of the reasons why we've talked about. Instead of having every teacher, every police officer, every city maintenance worker, because it's listed all non-merit employees, This just cuts it down to the people that are the decision makers. You know, all the legislators, all the public officials and candidates have to do the SEI. All the public officials of statewide jurisdiction have to do the SEI. The employees of the legislature would still have to do it. But it cuts down on every employee. Instead of that, it just does the agency heads and the people with like the purchasing power, the decision-making authority to be able to say, yes, we want to spend this money here. Those people need to follow the SEI, but not necessarily the everyday common worker that's, you know, when we talk about 300,000 to 1 million people falling under this bill, this is where we start narrowing some of this stuff out.
Okay, so obviously you can refer to that. Come ask for more questions. All right, so enforcement on page 34, section 80 is a new section, just basically, you know, stating that the commission's not going to issue a penalty or some type of reprimand unless they first make an actual determination the violation occurred. Section 181 is a new standalone section regarding complaints. A lot of this is taken from existing code section 4, but it's kind of, again, there's a kind of a new framework here. So there's, you kind of take different bits and pieces out of existing code and add other language to kind of make it fit what this draft is doing. That's what this next page is, 35. Again, lots of words, a chart here, bad for PowerPoint, much better for a handout. So you can kind of refer to that, right? But the flow here, right, is that the commission establishes these procedures and it publishes these procedures on the website. Complaints must be in writing. Upon the receipt, the director can kind of look at it and determine that it's not really going to be a violation. Nothing credible is mentioned, so it can be dismissed right away. If there's something that could be credible, the director would reach out to the respondent, give them a chance to respond, and after getting that response, can make another determination that it should be dismissed, or if not, then it goes to more of a fuller investigation. That, you know, happy to go over that later in more detail if you want, but that's a kind of a brief summary of how that process is supposed to work. Complaints are supposed to be confidential, just like they are now. This is primarily a continuation of section 4.1 of existing ethics code. I'm now on regarding section 82 of your draft.
Got about 1 minute, Mr.
Thank you. I was literally was going to ask you for a 1 minute more. I appreciate that.
Great minds.
That's right. Section 83, largely a continuation with a tweak that appropriate investigations can be conducted by agency heads before so they can determine that something's verifiable and credible before they just kind of report a violation to the ethics director. Investigations and contested case hearings. We're not going to have time to go through all this now. Just know that a lot of this is kind of taking a lot of different pieces that are coming from existing code and kind of reformatting it in a way that works with the civil regime and framework that's being used. We have several slides here dealing with investigations, contested case hearings, and how that process works. Please refer to your handouts. And of course, we can meet with any of you guys to go over it individually. Section 86, investigations are to remain confidential. There still can be criminal referrals. If they think that a violation has occurred, the Ethics Commission's required to report those and the evidence they have. Penalties, again, Section 88, a civil regime of penalties. You can see in your handout kind of different options they have to remedy situations. And then there's a reconsideration of contested case hearings I'll draw your attention to, as well as the appeal process. Basically, with the appeal process, you have to request, you have to contest the commissioner's recommendations and get a contested case hearing if you want to be able to appeal it. However, if new evidence is discovered through a reconsideration, or if the Ethics Commission fails to reconsider your petition, or denies your petition to reconsider, then you can appeal that. So those are the things I'll draw your attention to. Paul and I can stick around for more questions as long as y'all want, but I know there's other meetings starting right now, so I'll wrap my part up with that.
I'll be around. I'll be available if y'all have any questions, if you have anything that you like better, if we can draw anything out. Again, we've got, if you can give me something by the middle of next week so that way we can start working on this. That's why we get this time frame to give you guys to have some input before we actually drop the bill.
Remind us one more time what you expect us to do next Wednesday.
Next Wednesday, we're not going to have a meeting.
Okay.
I'm just going to schedule this to kind of, we're not scheduling anything from that. But the plan will be to take all the input I can by next week, to hopefully by the end of next week, by Thursday, to drop a bill by Thursday of next week. And then we should hopefully have a meeting on that the Wednesday after. Not Thursday. If you can do comments by, Tuesday, Wednesday, spend some time the rest of this week. Just shoot me some emails of anything that you have to get through, because we're going to be working and sitting down and going over a draft to see what we can.
Great, great. Mr. Intrican, Ms. Green, and Chairman Simpson, thank you very much for all of your work on this. I know it was a lot, and it's a lot to take in, so we will be doing our part from here on out. If there are no further questions, we stand adjourned.